When you walk into an Apple store today, there is there's just this overwhelming sense of inevitability.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like walking into the temple of perfect engineering. You see the massive glass walls, the wooden tables perfectly aligned.
Yeah, the lighting is always exactly right.
Right. And you've got the iPhone 17 practically glowing, the Apple Vision Pro sitting there like a piece of the future. It all just feels so clean, so precise.
Like it was completely planned from day one.
Exactly. Like
Okay.
they knew the whole time. But when we look at the actual history, that feeling of perfect destiny is, well, it's an
Yeah,
illusion.
illusion, yeah.
So today, we are bringing you on a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of sources. We're unpacking historical archives from the Computer History Museum, a deep business breakdown of Pixar.
Which is a crazy story on its own.
Right. And Wikipedia's archive on a forgotten company called NextT, all the way up to Apple's present-day 2026 storefront. Our mission today is to explore what you might call the wilderness years.
The lost decade of Steve Jobs. It's a period that most people just kind of gloss over, you know?
Yeah, they skip right from the early Macintosh days to the turtleneck-wearing iPhone era.
Right. They skip the messy parts.
Because everyone knows Apple is the world's most valuable company. But what we're going to uncover today is how the greatest business comeback in history, and honestly the foundation of modern computing as you know it, was actually built on a decade of spectacular, incredibly expensive failures.
Oh, massively expensive.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the empire of today, we have to rewind to 1985. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, experiences just the ultimate ego bruising.
Yeah, the worst possible scenario for him.
He gets ousted from his own company after losing a power struggle with CEO John Sculley, right? A guy he had personally recruited.
It's a seismic event in the tech world. Jobs resigns in a fury. But he doesn't just quietly fade away to an island somewhere.
Well, of course not.
He immediately sets out to build a new company, an Apple killer, basically, and he calls it NextT.
And he makes sure everyone knows about it. I mean, he takes a bunch of Apple defectors with him, which prompts Apple to literally sue him.
Yeah, for using insider information.
Right. The suit is eventually dismissed, but the drama is just off the charts. And the sheer hubris involved in launching NextT is staggering to read about. Like, he hires the legendary graphic designer Paul Rand to create the NextT logo.
Just the logo?
Just the logo. And he pays him, what was it?
$100,000.
Which is wild.
Yeah, adjusted for inflation, that's nearly $300,000 today. Just for the design.
For a logo. And Rand doesn't even give him options to choose from, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He hands Jobs a 20-page brochure explaining the philosophical meaning of the brand and a logo tilted at exactly a 28-degree angle.
That is so specific.
Rand famously tells Jobs, "I will solve your problem, you will pay me, and you don't even have to use it."
And Jobs, the ultimate control freak, just eats it up. He loved it. But I have to push back on this a bit because, well, spending $100,000 on a logo is one thing. But then he builds a state-of-the-art custom automated factory in Fremont, California.
A very expensive factory.
Right, for a company that ends up selling roughly 50,000 computers in its entire existence. Wait, so he spent $100,000 on a logo and built a custom factory for a company that only sold 50,000 computers. Was this just pure unchecked ego?
What's fascinating here is that it wasn't just ego, though, there was plenty of that. It was a complete obsession with building the ultimate machine for higher education.
Okay, so there was a target market.
Exactly. The vision was actually sparked by a lunch Jobs had with Nobel laureate Paul Berg. Berg told Jobs he needed a computer powerful enough to run wet lab DNA simulations.
Oh, okay.
Right, but cheap enough and small enough for a college dorm room. So Jobs took that as a personal challenge. He was trying to build this perfectly integrated system that would basically revolutionize universities.
I mean, I look at the specs for the NextT computer, and I see the tech equivalent of a multi-million-dollar concept car.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
You know, the ones at auto shows that are way too expensive for the actual road, totally impractical, but they're packed with experimental tech that eventually, like 10 years later, ends up in every minivan.
That is the perfect analogy, because the hardware of NextT was beautiful, but just deeply flawed commercially. They
Right.
built the Cube, this stunning 1-foot magnesium black box designed by Frog Design. But Jobs made some very stubborn hardware choices that doomed it.
Like what?
Well, for instance, he completely rejected the standard floppy drive. He insisted on a magneto-optical drive manufactured by Canon.
Which sounds incredibly sci-fi for the late 80s. But mechanically, why was that a problem?
Well, the discs themselves were only $50, which fit the student budget idea, but the drive itself was terribly slow.
Oh, gotcha.
We are talking an average seek time of 96 milliseconds. In practical terms, that meant the computer would constantly freeze while trying to read data.
That sounds infuriating.
It was, and because it was the only drive in the machine, you couldn't easily share files with other computers unless you were hooked up to a high-speed network.
Which barely existed at the time.
Barely existed, yeah. He also insisted on building in a custom DSP chip, a digital signal processor specifically for high-end music and sound processing.
So he's building this beautiful, slow, incredibly advanced, perfectly branded magnesium cube.
Yep.
And the retail price lands at almost $10,000.
Yep. 10 grand.
It's no wonder it flopped in the hardware market.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, students couldn't afford a $10,000 machine that couldn't even take a standard floppy disk.
Exactly. But to go back to your concept car analogy, the culture and the software inside that concept car were revolutionary. NextT had a radical corporate structure for the era.
Oh, salaries, right?
Yeah, they had a flat salary system. If you joined before 1986, you made $75,000. If you joined after, you made $50,000. That was it. No bonuses based on rank.
Meaning there were managers making less than the engineers they were managing.
Right. And the payroll was completely open so anyone could see what anyone else made.
That is wild for the 80s.
Totally. Plus, they were pioneering things like same-sex health benefits way back then. It was a completely different way of running a company. They were treating employees like academic peers rather than corporate drones.
But the true legacy, the experimental tech that genuinely changed the world, was the software.
Oh, absolutely. It was called NextT-Step. It was an object-oriented operating system that was so far ahead of its time, it basically became the playground for visionaries.
I want to dig into that because object-oriented is one of those terms that gets thrown around, but it is crucial to understand why it was such a big deal. Before this, writing software was incredibly tedious. Right?
Oh, was nightmare.
You were essentially writing out linear instructions line by line.
Precisely. Procedural programming meant that if you wanted to build an application, you were essentially molding a complex toy out of a single giant block of plastic.
Okay, I see.
If you wanted to change one feature, you risked breaking the entire structure. Object-oriented programming in NextStep was more like playing with Lego bricks.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, you could build with reusable, pre-packaged blocks of code. A developer could just grab a button object, drop it into their app, and know it would work perfectly. They didn't have to write the code for how a button functions from scratch every single time.
And that rapid prototyping ability is what blows my mind when you look at what was created on these failed machines.
It's incredible.
Like in 1990, a computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee is working at CERN. He uses a Next computer because of that exact software flexibility to invent the World Wide Web.
Yep. The very first web server and the first web browser were built on Steve Jobs' massive commercial failure.
The visual interface of the web as we know it exists because NextStep made it easy for Berners-Lee to build it.
And it wasn't just the internet either. Yeah. If you are a gamer, you owe a massive debt to NextT. John Carmack and the team at Did Software used NextT computers to develop the legendary video games Doom and Quake.
Wow, Doom was made on NXT.
It was. The platform software environment was simply unmatched for developers who wanted to build complex graphical things quickly.
So NextT is hemorrhaging cash, building beautiful concept cars that nobody's buying, despite the software being revolutionary. You'd think Jobs would be humbled, maybe scale back.
You would think that.
But instead, he is secretly bankrolling another massive money pit at the exact same time. While NextT is bleeding cash, Jobs had recently bought another failing hardware company from George Lucas.
Yeah, in 1986, Jobs buys the graphics group from Lucasfilm for $5 million, and he pumps in another $5 million of his own money just to keep the lights on.
And this little spinoff would eventually be known as Pixar.
Exactly.
Which is crazy because when you think of Pixar today, you think of Woody and Buzz Lightyear, you think of massive Disney blockbusters. But back then, Pixar was literally trying to sell computers.
Specifically, the Pixar imaging computer. And if you thought the NextT Cube was pricey, the Pixar computer had a staggering price tag of $135,000.
I mean, if the $10,000 NextT Cube was failing, A $135,000 imaging computer is just dead on arrival.
Yeah.
Who is the target market even supposed to be?
They were targeting the medical field for MRI rendering, government intelligence agencies, and high-end graphics industries.
Okay, so very niche.
Very. Disney actually bought a few to automate their 2D animation coloring process to replace hand-painted cells. But the sales volume was just abysmal.
Right.
Jobs ended up selling off the hardware division for a mere $2 million just to stop the bleeding. He was losing so much personal capital keeping Pixar afloat that he was getting truly desperate.
The sources show he almost sold Pixar in 1994. He was shopping it around to Microsoft's Paul Allen, to Larry Ellison at Oracle, even to Hallmark Cards.
Which is hilarious to think about.
Imagine a timeline where Hallmark owned Pixar. But the miraculous pivot came from the software and creative side, kind of mirroring what happened at NXT.
Exactly. Pixar was working on a totally unprecedented project, a full-length, entirely computer-animated feature film, and Disney had agreed to fund and distribute it for the 1995 holiday season.
That movie, of course, is Toy Story, and it changes everything.
It totally rewrites the map.
It grosses $360 million worldwide. It triggers a massive IPO for Pixar, going public at $22 a share. But this raises a huge question.
Okay, what's that?
Well, we just talked about Jobs obsessing over the 28-degree angle of a logo at NXT. He is famously the ultimate micromanager. How does the ultimate micromanager successfully run a creative animation studio full of storytellers?
That's the big mystery, isn't it?
Right. Was he actually a good manager at Pixar, or did he just not understand animation enough to interfere?
It is the stunning contradiction of Steve Jobs during these wilderness years. At Pixar, he learned to do something entirely against his nature. He recognized his own limitations. He didn't tell John Lasseter how to direct Toy Story. He didn't rewrite the jokes. Instead, Jobs realized his most valuable role was to be the shield and the attack dog for the creatives.
The attack dog against Disney.
Specifically against Disney's formidable CEO at the time, Michael Eisner.
See, under the original deal, Disney had all the leverage. They owned the characters, they took most of the profits. But after Toy Story, Pixar became a blockbuster machine with a bug's life, Finding Nemo, Cars.
Just hit after hit.
So when it came time to renegotiate the partnership in 2004, Jobs was ruthless. He demanded that Pixar films be released in the summer, not the winter.
Exactly. And why do you think he pushed so hard for the summer release?
Let me guess the mechanics of this. If you release a family movie in the summer, you capture the kids when they're out of school, maximizing your box office.
Yep.
And then the home video release, the DVDs, hits the shelves perfectly in late November for the Christmas shopping season.
Spot on. It was a brilliant, aggressive business multiplier. Eisner pushed back, but Jobs threatened to walk away and take Pixar to Fox or Warner Bros.
He used Pixar's unblemished track record as a bludgeon in negotiations.
And it worked out to the tune of billions. Eisner eventually leaves Disney. Negotiations resume under Bob Iger, and Disney ends up acquiring Pixar outright for a whopping $7.4 billion in an all-stock deal.
Which makes Steve Jobs, the guy who was almost bankrupted by this company, Disney's largest single shareholder.
Right. He walked away with 7% of Disney, worth $3.9 billion at the time.
He essentially funded a creative sandbox out of his own pocket, learned how to let geniuses be geniuses without micromanaging them, and negotiated the deal of a lifetime.
It's quite the pivot.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because armed with those Disney billions and a highly mature battle-tested software system from NXT, we find ourselves in 1996. And we have to look back at Apple.
The company he left behind.
Right. While Jobs has been out in the wilderness, Apple has practically been dying.
It was catastrophic. Apple was losing hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter. Their product line was bloated and confusing to consumers. They had dozens of Macintosh models with indistinguishable names like the Performa 6200 or the Quadra.
Nobody knew what to buy.
Exactly. And worse, Microsoft's Windows 95 had launched and completely eclipsed Apple's aging operating system.
Apple desperately needed a modern operating system to replace the classic Mac OS. They tried to build one internally and failed. So they look outside, and they end up buying NXT for $427 million, essentially just to get their hands on NXT Step.
And as part of the deal, Jobs returns to Apple as an advisor.
Just an advisor.
Right. The Apple CEO at the time, Gil Amelio, insists that Jobs take 1.5 million Apple shares as part of the buyout. Amelio thought that if the financial markets saw Steve Jobs holding Apple stock, it would give the struggling company some much-needed credibility.
which sets up Jobs pulling off what I can only describe as a Game of Thrones maneuver.
It really was.
He is frustrated with Emilio's leadership. He thinks Emilio is driving the company off a cliff. So in June 1997, Jobs anonymously dumps all 1.5 million of his Apple shares on the open market,
Just sells them all.
which is a brilliant, ruthless mechanism if you understand market psychology. When the founder of a company publicly unloads everything, it is a massive distress signal to Wall Street.
Exactly. The institutional investors see that and assume the guy who literally built the company thinks it's completely doomed. The liquidity dries up.
He literally shorted his own company's stock to prove the current king was failing just so he could seize the crown. The stock hits a 12-year low. The board of directors absolutely panics.
They had no choice.
They fire Gil Amelio in July, and by September, Steve Jobs is named the interim CEO. He's back on the throne.
Now look at the mechanics of why the Apple NXT merger actually saved the company. We talked about NXT being a commercial hardware failure, but that failure was the crucible.
How so?
Well, because NXT couldn't sell their own expensive magnesium cubes, they were forced to make their next step software hardware independent so they could sell it to other companies. They ported it to run on Intel chips, on SPARC, on PARIC systems.
It meant the software had to be incredibly robust and flexible. It couldn't just rely on custom Apple chips to function.
Precisely. Apple, meanwhile, had a massive hardware manufacturing base, but a failing, archaic software system. It was the perfect accidental puzzle piece.
Oh, I see.
When Jobs took over Apple, he didn't just bring his aesthetic sensibilities back. He brought the entire NXT software architecture.
And you interact with that architecture every single day. If you use a Mac, the dock at the bottom of your screen, that is directly from NXT.
Yep.
The Cocoa programming interface that developers use to write modern apps, NXT. The underlying code for the iTunes Store, which revolutionized digital commerce, that was built on WebObjects, a platform developed at NXT.
The entire foundation of Mac OS X, which eventually became Mac OS, and then was scaled down to become iOS for the iPhone and iPad.
Wait, really?
Yeah, all of it is Next Step wearing an Apple logo.
So Jobs is back. He has his software foundation. He has the financial security of the billions from Pixar. He has learned how to negotiate with titans like Michael Eisner. And he has learned how to manage brilliant creatives like designer Jony Ive without stifling them.
He took the hits and learned from them.
He takes all the hard lessons of the wilderness years and starts building the modern Apple ecosystem.
And he starts by cleaning house. He slashes that bloated, confusing product line down to a simple 4-square grid, a desktop and laptop for consumers, and a desktop and laptop for professionals. He kills dozens of projects overnight.
The first major swing is the iMac in 1998. It is colorful, it's curved, it's translucent, and crucially, it doesn't have a floppy drive, which outraged people at the time, and it's built entirely around getting on the internet easily.
Right, the setup was so simple.
Their whole marketing pitch was step 1, plug in, step 2, plug in the phone line, there is no step 3.
It was a massive hit. But Jobs knew that having great products wasn't enough if the retail experience was terrible.
Yeah, buying a computer was miserable back then.
In 2001, every other computer company was retreating to big box electronic superstores, places where Macs were shoved in a back corner covered in dust, sold by clerks who knew nothing about them. Jobs did the unthinkable. He launched Apple's own branded retail stores,
which were so controversial. Analysts predicted they would fail within a year. But Jobs understood the mechanism of control. He needed minimalist, well-lit, laboratory-like zones to control the narrative of the ecosystem.
He wanted to own the whole experience.
He wanted you to walk in and see how the software connected the hardware, and he created the Genius Bar, staffing the store with experts to solve problems face-to-face, entirely removing the frustration of calling a tech support hotline.
That retail strategy perfectly primed the pump for the next revolution. Later in 2001, Apple introduces the iPod.
Now, MP3 players existed, but they were clunky, and they relied on flash memory that could only hold a dozen songs.
Right. Apple used a new miniaturized mechanical hard drive technology from Toshiba to offer 1,000 songs in your pocket.
And he paired the iPod with the iTunes Store in 2003, which is where his Pixar negotiation skills really show up. Music piracy was terrifying the record labels. Napster had basically broken their entire revenue model.
They were panicking.
So Jobs walks into those boardrooms and offers a lifeline, but on his terms. He convinces them to sell songs a la carte for 99 cents, but with Apple's proprietary digital rights management, or DRM.
Which was genius.
Meaning the labels get paid, but the songs only play seamlessly on an iPod. He essentially saves the industry from piracy while legally locking consumers into the Apple ecosystem.
Which sets the stage for the crescendo in 2007, the Macworld trade show.
Oh, this is the big one.
Jobs announces that Apple Computer is dropping the word computer from its name. It is now just Apple Inc. And he introduces a device he describes as three things: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator.
The iPhone, the device that shifted the axis of the Earth. Because of the foundation of NXT, the iPhone wasn't just a phone. It was a powerful computer in your pocket, running a scaled-down version of Mac OS X. It allowed for the App Store in 2008, fundamentally changing software distribution. Then the iPad in 2010.
And that brings us right up to the storefront of today.
You look at the Apple website in 2026,
Yeah.
and you see the iPhone 17s, the Apple Watch Series 11, the AirPods Max, and the spatial computing of the Apple Vision Pro. So what does this all mean? How do we contextualize this monolithic empire against a $100,000 logo and a failing magnesium cube?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it means that Apple's true success wasn't just in making pretty hardware. Through the painful lessons of NXT and Pixar, Jobs transformed Apple from a niche computer maker into a massive-scale global content distribution company.
The hardware is just the beautiful frame for the software and the ecosystem.
Exactly. Jobs himself perfectly summarized his evolved philosophy later in life. He said, "My model for business is the Beatles. There were four guys who kept each other's kind of negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum of the parts." That's how I see business. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people.
That is such a profound shift from the young, impulsive, dictatorial guy who got fired in 1985 for being an impossible micromanager.
It's a completely different mindset.
And that brings us all back to you, listening right now. When you look at the Apple ecosystem today, how your Mac Studio syncs perfectly with your iPhone 17, how your AirPods hand off seamlessly to your Apple Vision Pro, it feels like the result of a flawless, inevitable master plan.
Like they knew exactly what they were doing from day one.
But it wasn't. It was forged through brutal firings, ego-driven failures, absurd hubris, and totally accidental pivots.
It was a deeply messy human process of trial and error. The polished glass temple of today was built on the rubble of yesterday's expensive mistakes.
Exactly. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to mull over today. If Steve Jobs had never been humiliated and fired from Apple in 1985, he never would have started NXT. He never would have built the bulletproof, object-oriented software that modern Macs and iPhones run on today. And he never would have learned how to step back and let creators breathe at Pixar.
He needed those failures.
Is it possible that without his two most humiliating, expensive failures, the trillion-dollar Apple ecosystem you rely on today wouldn't even exist? Sometimes your biggest disaster is actually just the research and development phase for your greatest success.